That's because your mind is going into the gutters. So it's really hard.
It's a gross word. Okay. Yeah, are there any other words like that for you? They just like trigger something and you're like, ugh. Grimy, chummy. That's a word I don't like. Any others? We have moist, slimy. Words have an incredible amount of power. Sometimes we can have a visceral reaction to a particular word. Sometimes someone merely saying some particular word in a conversation will trigger a memory within you, right? Or a feeling. Language is deeply a part of our society. How we do things, how we move and act in the world. And today that's what we're going to be talking about. Because as strong critical thinkers, the words that we hear and use are going to influence our relationships with other people. They're going to influence the feelings that we have, the mood that we might be in, what we think is possible, what we pursue. Words, you could argue, in a kind of symbolic way, are magical in that way. Someone merely saying something can evoke a very strong reaction or feeling. And so, if we're going to understand the world better, if we're going to move within it, accomplish our goals, we need to be able to evaluate how people use words, how we might use words, the kinds of reactions and feelings that words evoke. In this study of the art of persuasion using words or using images is called rhetoric. Now, historically, with respect to philosophy, rhetoric has always been in a very tenuous position. As far back as Plato and a lot of other ancient Greek thinkers who were philosophical, who wanted to uncover the truth, they saw rhetoric as kind of a dirty, underhanded thing. Why do you think that might be? Trying to persuade someone using your words. Why might they see that as dirty or underhanded?
Because you could be trying to undermine someone, trying to get them to think something else that you're not trying to specifically say.
Sure. You can use it to manipulate people, right? Instead of using logic, you're trying to use words to persuade people of something. Good. That was one of the primary hang-ups that these philosophers had. They realized that words and how we use them may not necessarily be connected to the truth at all. And we know this because people use words to manipulate others all the time. You use words to influence other people all the time. It may be as innocuous as going to the grocery store and asking the checkout person, oh yeah, hey, can you scan my code? And then they do that. But through your very use of words, you've made them do something for you. Through the use of my words, I make y'all do things. Through the use of your words, you make your friends feel a certain way, you make your parents let you stay out late maybe, or go to your friend's house, or whatever it may be. So, rhetoric forms a very large part of how we interact with other people. And there's rhetoric that is being used on you every day to get you to think or act in a certain way. What do you think advertisements are? The use of words and images to get you to act or think a certain way, right? There's a whole industry that has grown up around this. So this is what we're going to look at today. Because we're swimming in this sea of information and images and words, you need to be able to figure out what different feelings these words evoke for you. How people might be using words to influence you. Because it is everywhere. And the use of rhetoric does not necessarily have to be conscious or intentional. Okay? You may not be trying to manipulate people with your words, but you are influencing them nonetheless. And the same thing happens to you. Thus, if we define rhetoric in this way, the art or study of persuasion with respect to producing a text, rhetoric shows up everywhere. Books, shows, lectures, movies, music, cartoons, essays, advertisements. All of these things we could call texts. For the purpose of class moving forward, we'll define text as anything that can be read or interpreted. Okay? And we're going to be analyzing texts. And we're going to be asking questions of them and interrogating them, trying to understand them, trying to get inside the author's head. Because all of this stuff will clue us into, well, what the text is trying to say, why it was written the way that it was, or constructed the way that it was, and perhaps what the text is trying to get you to do as well. Okay, any questions so far? All right, well, let's get into it then. Today I asked you to read the first 21, 22 pages of Chapter 1 of the Language of Composition. And it's a book like this that goes over, well, what is rhetoric? How can we spot it? What are the different kinds of techniques and appeals people use in order to influence you? We're going to get a lot of this out on the table today so that when you read a text, an essay in this class, or what a friend says to you, or an advertisement out there, you'll be better able to understand not only what it's trying to say, but what it's trying to get you to do. If you don't know what these techniques and appeals are, you can't look out for them. And if you want to attain your own goals, if you want to understand the world better, you have to be able to spot when people are trying to use words to influence you. Because it happens to you every day, whether you realize it or not. So we're going to start out with the basics. Effective persuasion requires consideration of a number of factors, but we have a helpful little acronym here for you that breaks down some of these. If you are writing an essay, if you're producing your own text, or if you're writing a speech, you're going to talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend about something, try to persuade them of something, you should think about these things. You should also think about these when you come across a text, an advertisement, a speech, an essay, whatever it is. One of the first things you'll want to consider begins with the letter S. We will call it the subject. Now, for those of you who did the reading, what does subject mean in the context of rhetoric? Say that again? Right. We'll put the topic of the text. What is the subject of my lecture today? What's the main topic? Rhetoric. Good. When your friend approaches you and they're really hungry and they want to ask you to go to Chipotle, what might be the subject of their asking you, of their little speech they give you? Getting food at Chipotle? Yeah. When you see an advertisement out there, it has a particular subject or topic, main idea, main issue. If you're composing your own text or you're reading one, try to figure out what this might be. This will give you a lot more insight into, well, what is this thing trying to say? Why is it using the precise words it is? Okay, so we have subject. Anybody know what the O stands for in SOAPs? Occasion? What is that? Shout it out if you know it. Context. Okay. What do you think that means? The occasion or context of a text.
The situation, time.
Situation? Good. Yeah, what else?
I think that can influence the decision.
Okay.
Someone's mood.
We'll speak more into that. Yeah. The place. Okay, where it came from.
How the subject is being applied in the context of the text.
Okay. Yeah, any other ideas? We've kind of mentioned place. We've kind of mentioned origin or source.
Maybe it's like someone's mood.
Someone's mood? That might be a part of the occasion or context. Yeah. When you think this, I think it's helpful to think of environment. Okay? We can define the occasion as the time and place a text is given. And this might include a lot of things. Okay? Things like the circumstances surrounding where the speech is given. Is it hot out? Is it cold out? Is it outside? Is it inside? What is the vibe? What's the atmosphere? Okay? What are the attitudes of the people there in attendance, including the speaker? What are the circumstances here? All of this stuff is what we mean by occasion or context. Because a text is never written or a speech is never given in a vacuum. Right? It occurs at a place, at a time. There's an atmosphere there. Right? There are things happening around them. There is the way that place is. Right? All of that kind of stuff impacts how a text is received. For example, this room is built in a particular way so that there's reverberation, right? My lecture is resounding around the room. That's on purpose. So if you're giving your own speech, for example, you should think on, well, when and where should I give this? Because that's going to have a huge impact on how it lands. Okay, good. So we have S and we have O. Anybody know what A stands for?
Audience.
Audience. All right. What does that mean? Who's the audience? Who I'm speaking to? Yeah, in this context, y'all are the audience. Yep.
The people you're trying to persuade, or it could be that, but it could be that.
Sure, the people you're trying to persuade could be them.
The reader of the text.
The reader of the text. Good. Who reads the text? When musicians make music, or when professors give a lecture, or when a philosopher writes a particular text, they're doing it for a particular audience, right? Do you think Taylor Swift is making music for metalheads? No. Who's she making music for? White girls. Young women. Sure, yeah. Yeah, who is a professor crafting his lectures for? College students, right? So I'm not going to use, maybe the same kind of tonation and words that I would use when I'm talking to a 2-year-old. Right? Yeah, the audience is just who reads the text, who receives the text. Okay? All texts should be written with this in mind. Because again, how a text is going to land, how it's going to influence people, is going to be determined by who receives it. If you don't use skincare products, you're not going to be motivated to buy them by some advertisement out on the street. Right? No, that is aimed towards a particular demographic of people. So, when you encounter an advertisement, when you encounter a text or a lecture, you should think, who is this made for? Because that will help clue you into why the author is saying what they're saying, why it's constructed the way that it is. Okay? Make sense? Okay. S-O-A-P. Purpose. The thing we're all trying to discover in our lives in which we're thrown about by the winds of fate. No. What is purpose? In relation to rhetoric. Say that again?
The reason
The reason for what?
for the text to be written.
The reason for the text to be written. Another way of putting that is, what is the goal the speaker is trying to achieve? Okay? What kind of goal am I trying to achieve through my lecture today? Say that again? Teaching you?
Understand rhetoric.
Yeah, I'm hoping you'll understand rhetoric. Yeah, my goal is to transmit information. It's to stoke within you this fire, this curiosity, so you'll engage in critical thinking. It's to help you learn and grow psychologically and socially and educationally. Yeah. Let's go back to the skincare advertisement. What's the purpose of the advertising firm that develops that little thing you see on the street? Sell products. Yeah. Make money. What do you think Taylor Swift's purpose is in making music?
Making money.
Could be making money, could also be expressing herself, could be doing what she loves, right? The purpose of a text might be multifaceted. It might not just be one thing. But you should ask yourself whenever you encounter a text, what are they trying to achieve with this thing? That will help you divine their intentions, whether or not you should be looking at it at all, perhaps what kind of effect it's going to have on you. Okay, good. Then we have one more. S. Speaker, it's a word we've been using a lot, right? What is a speaker when it comes to rhetoric? Right. Yeah. It's the person, or we'll say people, who produced the text. Who's the speaker of this lecture today? Professor Gunner, right? Who's the speaker of, I don't know, Taylor Swift's music? Taylor Swift and maybe all those other writers she has with her, because maybe they're also trying to accomplish something by helping her write the lyrics. Good. Advertisements. Who are the speakers of those things? The companies, whoever's involved with trying to get that product sold, right? Yeah, texts don't just appear out of thin air. Somebody, or now something, produces them. And if I could put my cards on the table, this is in part why AI is so dangerous. Because you don't exactly know where that information is coming from. And it's not a human being who's crafting that text. A human being you can understand, right? Perhaps. You could understand their motivations and their goals, why they use these words, why they use them in that order. But we might be dealing with something different with these new technologies. Okay, good. So when you evaluate a text in the future, keep this stuff in mind. What is the topic of the text? What is the environment of the text or context in which the text is given? Who is the text written for or produced for? What is the goal of the text and who or what produced the text? All of these things are going to help figure out not only what the text is trying to say, but the kind of impact it's going to have on you. Okay? Now, to reiterate, Critical thinking is like a muscle. If you don't think about this kind of stuff when you encounter a text, what's going to happen to you? Nothing? Have you ever been swayed by an advertisement? Anybody ever walk around the grocery store and they see the big sale sign for the Cheetos and they're like, oh, maybe I'll get a bag of Cheetos, yeah. Yeah. You are surrounded by texts. In this world, you are surrounded by forces that are using language in order to get you to think and behave in a certain way. If you don't interrogate these texts, you're at risk of just becoming another part of their game plan or their goals, unthinkingly. Okay? But if you're going to become an individual and think for yourself and come to your own beliefs and live authentically, you have to reflect on this stuff. Okay? Otherwise, you may find that your will and your desires are no longer your own. Make sense? Okay. Well, let's move on to our next topic then. I'm sure you've all gotten this in high school, but it's worth putting on the table. In the field of rhetoric, there are 3 primary appeals someone might use in order to persuade an audience of something. I have them written on the board already. First, we have ethos or ethos. Related to the Greek word for character, what is this appeal trying to do? Like, let's say you craft a speech with ethos in mind for me to raise your grade. What would your speech include if you were trying to do this, make this appeal? Yeah! Professor Gunner, I know I let this assignment lapse, but I'm really normally on top of things. I'm a good student. I'm honest. I've always gotten A's in the past. Yeah, you're trying to establish your own credibility, your own trustworthiness. That's one thing that you can use in order to make your texts more persuasive. Has to do with appealing to one's character or trying to establish credibility or trustworthiness. To give myself enough room, I'm sorry. Now, this may come in a variety of forms. If you were trying to establish your own trustworthiness to me, let's say you were trying to persuade me to put money into this new cryptocurrency, how would you get me to trust you? That's a red flag.
You would show how much you've made off of crypto. So maybe if you have $1,000 off of $5, that's it. You show the person that and you're like, look, I benefited from it. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, good. You might show me your own assets. You might say something like, well, Professor Gunner, I am going to school for finance and trading. I'm taking classes on this stuff, right? You might explain to me your own educational background, your own knowledge, your own capacities, to try to get me to trust you, right? So you might bring up your education, your background, your experience. Look, Professor Gunner, I have a lot of experience trading cryptocurrencies. I'm telling you, Doge is going to go up any day now. You should really put 10 grand into it if you can. Look at how much I've made. Look at how trustworthy I am. So, you might do that. You might emphasize your own experiential or educational background. You might try to show that you have these knowledge and skills. What else might you do? Let's say I thought cryptocurrency was a scam. How would you persuade me to put money into it?
To suggest that you can make money off of scamming.
Well, look, Professor Gunner, I know you value money. You need money to survive. It might be a scam, but there's some money to be made here, even if it is a scam. Why don't you go in on this with me, right? You might appeal to your own audience's shared values, ideals, goals. That would be an effective way of persuading me, right? In other words, you could probably get me to trust you if you convinced me that we're aligned on our goals and on our ideals. Isn't this how people convince other people all the time? Think of politicians, right? They're trying to win the next election. What do? Well, they're going to go to these different groups on their tour and they're going to say, we care about the same things. We're trying to reach the same place. That's why you should support me. Right? This is an example of ethos. Okay, logos. Now this can mean many different things in Greek. It can mean word, reason, principle. This is what we've been looking at this whole time in class so far. How would you summarize what logos is? Logic? What does that mean in the context of persuading someone? Using proven data. Okay. What else? Yeah?
Counter-arguments, facts, statistics.
You might anticipate counter-arguments. You might bring up statistics and facts. Good. What else? Sage. Right. Providing evidence, providing reasons and justifications for what you're saying. Yeah, all of this could fit under logos. Okay? Involves appealing to logic or reason. Maybe appealing to the other person's reasoning capacities. Look, Professor Gunner, this is the logical thing to do. Just look at the facts of the situation. Think about what's rational, right? We are all emotional creatures. We're moved by our emotions, but we all also have this thing called reason or rationality. That's what allows us to engage in conscious, critical thinking in the first place. We can take a step back and we can objectively analyze things. Well, we've all been conditioned in this society to place reason or logic highly. So, of course, if you use reason and logic in your own argumentation, if you appeal to other people's reasoning capacity, you can persuade them of things. Right? Good. That's what logos is. So, we've mentioned a few already. We might utilize research, statistics, data, other forms of evidence. We might also appeal to facts and expert testimony, perhaps. And normally we do this in order to create a logical argument. Another way of doing this, which is very common in philosophy, is expressing the relationships between things and between the premises and the conclusion that you're putting forward. Doing this in a justifiable way, giving your reasons for the conclusion, right? Offering your evidence. So, we might appeal to one's character or our own to try to establish ourselves as credible or trustworthy. We might use logic and reason, or appeal to someone's reasoning capacities, or appeal to what's rational or what's objective, right? Finally, we have pathos. What is this one? Appealing to one's emotion. Good. You might appeal to somebody's emotions or their feelings or their hopes, their dreams. Anything within them that is tied to emotion. Just imagine I'm writing all that over there. You might appeal to their desires or their fears. That's a good one to write down. Fears. Isn't that how a lot of, drumming up support in politics does? It appeals to people's fears. It appeals to their hopes, their emotions. Now again, we are logical creatures. We have this capacity for reason, but we are also emotional creatures. So, if I could offer my own opinion, this one is probably the strongest. Do you live your lives as a cold calculating computer, or do you normally act on the basis of how you feel? It's probably the latter, right? We all act on the basis of how we feel. And what we feel, well, it plays a large role in our lives. So, we might evoke the emotions of the audience in order to persuade them. That would be a very effective way to try to get them to think or do something. For example, we shouldn't allow any immigration at all because they're going to come in here and kill your children. Would that not appeal to people's fear? Would that not get them to, think and act in a certain way with regards to matters of immigration policy? This is used all the time in politics, right? But if you can spot it, you can get a better handle on your own thoughts and on your own actions. How might you appeal to the emotions of people? What kind of language would you use?
Softer tone.
Maybe. Yeah, depending on what you're trying to persuade them of, right? If you're trying to persuade people to rise up and fight, you would use different language, right? Yeah. What other forms of language might you use if you're appealing to someone's emotions?
Like, I don't know if this is unique, but use like, it's writing, like imagery, like putting people in a different perspective.
Yeah. Images can be very powerful, right?
You might want to exaggerate a little bit.
You might exaggerate? Yeah. That happens all the time in politics, right? Yeah. Anything else you can think of? We could summarize some of this with figurative language. Oh, I'm starting to run out of room. I know it's messy. You might use personal anecdotes, personal experiences. My son was saved by St. Jude, so you should donate today. Right? You see this kind of stuff all the time. You might relay a personal experience. You might appeal, when you're doing this, to the prejudices of the audience, of your audience, or their biases. You might use vivid imagery. You might use humor. Getting people to laugh can disarm them, right? Depending on your purpose, you would use harder or softer language. You might exaggerate. All of these things can be effectively used to appeal to the audience's emotions, to get them to think or act in a certain way. Now, in practice, it's not always as clear-cut as this, because speakers tend to use a combination of appeals, and they might switch back and forth between them. One moment, you're hearing a rational argument for why you should support raising the tax rate. The next, you're hearing a personal anecdote about how not raising the tax rate is going to kill a bunch of people and they're going to be stuck in poverty and, trying to pull on your heartstrings. So, good speakers, good rhetoricians will use a combination of these things, and they might swap back and forth between them. What determines when and why they do that? Well, in large part, it's going to be these things. Who are they talking to? Are they talking to, for example, black middle-aged mothers of college students? Or are they talking to, white, rural, poor Appalachians? It's also going to be determined by the purpose. What are they trying to accomplish? All of these things influence the texts that are being thrown at you every day. And all of this is influencing the delivery of this lecture to you today. The words that I'm using, the images I'm bringing up, they're all intended to get you to think in a certain way. Okay, any questions about that? Does that make sense? So to summarize, a text might appeal to one's character, to logic, or to emotion. And all of these can be very effective in persuading an audience of something. Let's get a little bit more specific, though, about what we should be looking at when we're reading a text and what we should be thinking about when we're crafting one of our own. Because every day we craft and deliver texts. Every day we're subject to a sea of texts. Let's now talk just a little bit more precisely about what kinds of things you should think about when you're reading a text, or when you're faced with an advertisement, or when someone is making a plea to you. Okay? First, let's talk about different rhetorical applications in writing. Let's say you're trying to craft an Instagram post to get people to buy your product. What would you think about to make the most engaging, persuasive post? All three of these? Yeah, good. Just think a little bit more simply. The what? How the images look? Yeah, how the images are arranged. The images themselves. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, what would you think about?
Who am I selling this to?
True. Yeah. And to that end, you would think about the words that you're going to use, right? You're going to painstakingly think about what words are going to get people to buy your product, that are going to draw them in, that are going to convince them to follow you and support you. you're also going to avoid using some words, right? If you're trying to sell a product on Instagram, are you going to use racial slurs? Are you going to use coarse, cursing language? Probably not, unless you're trying to appeal to a particular audience, right? Are you going to arrange words in a certain way that tells them about a random event that happened to you yesterday? No, the words you're going to use have to deal with your product, right? And making a transaction. You're also going to pay attention to the order of your words. What, are you going to write your post like Yoda? My product you should buy. Oh. Would you write a post like that? If you're honestly trying to sell it? No, right? You would make sure your post is grammatical, that the words are arranged in a particular way. You're going to pay attention to the connotations of the words you're using. Would you use the word moist in an Instagram advertisement? Would you use the word circumcision? Why? Why not? It might be uncomfortable, right? It summons up these nasty, disgusting images, maybe. Clinical. Unless maybe you're trying to sell something to nurse practitioners. I don't know. You're going to pay attention to the connotations, right? How about your tone? Are you going to try to alienate your audience by being really mean? Buy my product, bitch! No, you wouldn't, right? All of this stuff is very effective. What is my tone like today? It's what? Jolly. I like it. Hopefully it's vivacious. Does it seem, welcoming? Does it seem kind? Or does it seem cruel? Right. All of these things are going to influence how a text lands. So if you're trying to sell a product, you're going to think about the words. You're going to think about the words you shouldn't use, the tone and connotations. All of these things are going to impact how your audience gets that message. If you're a little bit more conscious and deliberative about it, you might also think about sentence structure. That might not be very impactful or worth thinking about when it comes to a short thing like an Instagram post. But if you're writing an essay for this class, are you going to pay attention to sentence structure? What are you going to start your paragraphs off with? Capital, good, capital letter. Hopefully that's followed by a topic sentence that tells the reader what the paragraph is about. Right? And then maybe a transition sentence, and then you get into the meat of it, and then at the end you're going to use another transition sentence that leads into the next paragraph, right? Think about how a poem is structured. The word choice and the sentence structure is meticulously chosen to evoke a kind of feeling in you, right? And it's going to have a very different impact on you, a poem, than a dry scientific article. Right? Because these are trying to accomplish very different purposes. If you're writing a longer piece, of course you're going to think about paragraph structure. On Friday, you have your first in-class writing assignment. What are you going to start your essay off with? Something like an introduction, maybe? Yeah. Depending on the instructions I give you, right? Would you start with the conclusion? Would you start in the middle of the essay with your third body paragraph? No. If you're writing a manual for a product, you're also going to pay attention to this, right? Are you going to start by talking about one of the specifications deeply inside the machine right away? No, you're going to start off maybe with an image of the thing, taken with different parts pointed out, and you're going to go through it step by step, depending on how you want to relay that information. Of course, you're also going to pay attention to punctuation. How might you end an Instagram advertisement? With 3 periods? No. What would you use? An exclamation point, maybe. Or perhaps, if you're trying to entice them, you'll end with a question, right? So it's like a question mark. Ooh. When your friend sends you a text and it says this, how do you feel? We need to talk. Period. What kind of emotions does that summon for you? Are you excited? Or are you anxious and you're thinking, what the fuck is going on? Oh my God, what did I do? Yeah, for some reason, this means a very big thing to younger generations. The kinds of punctuation that people use invokes emotions. It influences how they think, what they feel. Okay, good. Has anybody here ever made like a scientific presentation that you have displayed at a science fair? What did you pay attention to when you were making your poster? Graphics, layout, what I would call formatting, right? Making sure all the pieces are arranged in a way that they can be read, that they neatly go through the experiment that you did, right? Are you going to use 6-point font on your giant science presentation poster? Why not? They can't read it. You're going to use maybe, 36-point font for the title, right? So you're going to pay attention to font, style, size, etc. Color, right? You're going to put white font on a white poster? No. That would be stupid. All of these things impact how a text lands. And if somebody is really trying to use rhetoric, they're going to think about each one of these things before they craft their text and give it to you. Poets think about this stuff a lot. Okay, so these would be some considerations in writing. How about in speeches? What would you think about if you were crafting a speech? Well, a lot of the same things, right? You would think about your words. You would think about words you should not say, like racial slurs when you're giving a lecture, right? You would think about your ordering, the connotations of your words, the tone that you're giving, all of this stuff. But there are a few other things that you would think about. For example, cadence of your voice. If you're giving a speech, are you going to give it slowly like this? Why not?
Boring.
What?
It makes it sound boring.
Makes it sound boring? I'm going to lose you, right? You're going to lose your audience. Nobody's going to be paying attention. Nobody's going to get anything from it. But if you keep up some kind of rhythmic cadence that can be followed along, you're still transmitting information and you're still keeping them engaged. Yes? What else do we have? Yes, affect. What is my affect? What does it sound like? Do I sound like an angry parent? Do I sound like a little kid that wants to play Legos? No. What does my voice sound like to you? A professor who authoritatively knows what they're talking about? Maybe, I hope. Yes. Related to cadence, but slightly distinct. We could talk about speed. I'm not going through the content so fast that you can't follow along, but I'm not going through it so slowly that you're napping because you've fallen asleep. I'm also paying attention to volume. I am projecting my voice so that you can all hear it. But if I talk like this, could you hear me? Did you catch that? If I spoke too softly, you wouldn't be able to understand a thing that I said, right? This lecture would not be effective. So your volume is an important consideration. And volume has a lot to do also with what? Well, what we might call affect or tone. If somebody is speaking very loudly at you, how does that make you feel?
Irritated.
Irritated? Scared, right? Like somebody's yelling at you, right? They're trying to intimidate you, you might think. Maybe your parents are coming down hard on you because you crashed the car. And you feel scared and anxious and upset and you want to run away, right? Volume and tone are very important. If you're trying to break some bad news to someone, you're not going to raise your voice so loudly like you're yelling at them, are you? No. You might speak a little more slowly, a little more softly, right? Because you're trying to give them some bad information and you don't want them to freak the hell out, right? Hello, everyone! What was I doing with my voice there? What's up? Pitch, inflection, right? Would you take me seriously if I always talking like that? How you guys doing today? No, you'd think, what the hell is wrong with this guy? We can't take him seriously. Did he really go to school for over half of his life? Those are also going to affect how a speech lands. And there's one more that people don't think enough about. Silence can be very effective when used in a speech. Pausing at the right moment, right? How did you all feel when I paused there? Confused? But did it draw you in a little bit? What's he going to say next? Why is he doing this? What's going on? Right? Too many people steamroll through their speeches. But in giving speeches, and more specifically in teaching, pauses can be really impactful. Okay, let's just talk about two more broad considerations. We've talked about rhetorical devices or things you might want to consider in speech and in writing. What else might impact how a text lands for you? Let's talk specifically about this lecture. How about my appearance? Does that impact at all how my words are landing for you? All right. All right, you ready to seriously get down to business here? You're going to pay attention? Yeah? What does this make you think of? You all are laughing, right? Are you taking this seriously? Or is it silly? Obviously, if I wore this for the whole lecture, it would have an impact on you, right? And your learning. So, of course, appearance is going to matter, right? How you dress. Your facial expressions, right? Do you seem terrified up there? If I did seem scared, how do you think that would impact your experience of this lecture? Maybe you would trust me less. Maybe you wouldn't take what I was saying at face value, right? If I was, so we're going to talk about rhetoric today. That would be silly, right? That would not be effective at all. So the facial expressions you make can be very important. Pay attention to other people's facial expressions. It'll help you figure out their emotions, perhaps something about their intentions as well, right? Your partner comes up to you and they look really guilty. What might that lead you to think? Maybe they're going to tell me some bad news, right? Maybe they cheated on me or something. How you hold your body is also going to affect how your speech lands. What's my posture been like today? I hope, relatively straight. I slouch a little bit. But have I been cowering? Have I been making myself small? Have I been isolating myself to one area of the room? How you move within a space, the posture that you have, this is going to affect how the information lands. For example, if I gave my lecture like this, what do you all think? Huh? Yeah? Pretty good? Would that help you internalize the information? No, you would be distracted. Again, you'd be thinking, man, my philosophy professor, he's a nutcase. I don't know, it's a riot in that class, right? You probably wouldn't remember anything. So again, how you move your body through the space. The particular medium that you use as well will impact how the information lands. For example, it would evoke different emotions in you rather than through the medium of speech. I gave my lecture today just using pictures or illustrations. Watercolors will evoke a different emotion in you than oil paintings, right? A sketch done by pencil will evoke a different kind of emotion or thought in you than something done with markers outside the lines like a little kid draws, right? So, how is the information being presented? What is the medium? Speech? Is it image? Is it cartoon? Is it political essay? Is it op-ed? All of that is going to have an impact. Technique as well, of course. If I didn't draft up any teaching notes for today, this lecture would be messier, right? And it wouldn't land as well. I've been using rhetorical techniques on you this whole time. I'm employing particular techniques to get you to listen and to get you to remember this information. Again, if we want to think about art, the technique that's used to craft images on a billboard is going to land differently than a soft graphite sketch that your friend gives you. Right? It might seem trivial, but if I walked around the whole class with this on top of my head, balancing it, okay, my lecture would land differently for you, right? Than it would because I'm holding it in my hand. Similarly, if these desks were arranged in a different way, or if you're looking at a painting, the objects arranged in that space, those different arrangements are going to have a different influence on you. Right? Think about the scream. That makes you feel differently than the Mona Lisa. The people in those paintings are arranged differently in space. Let's go back to somebody giving a speech now. Professor Gunner. Would it impact your learning experience if I hadn't showered in 2 weeks?
Yes.
How so? I'd smell, and what would that lead you to think?
You're gross.
I'm gross. Would it help you internalize the information better if I stunk? Like cat litter and cat poop and old moldy food? Of course not, right? It'd be a way worse experience for you, and you wouldn't take away nearly as much. So, whenever you're giving a speech, or for example, when you're going for an interview, pay attention to your cleanliness and hygiene, because that's going to have an impact on how that whole thing goes and how your request to get a job lands, right? Also, of course, we're going to mention clothing and accessories. Am I dressed up like a surfer bro today? Maybe a little bit with the sandals. But no, right? I have a button-down shirt on with a tie, with a sick tie clip. I did my hair, right? I don't have any of my accessories in or on today, really. But if I showed up here, with my chained wallet and my goth and emo clothes and, piercings up and down all my ears, septum piercing, snake bites, all that, how would that seem to you? You would look at me differently. You would have a different experience throughout the course of this lecture. So that's another thing to consider. What have I used today to help draw you into the lecture? Well, I tried playing this game with you, which was a horrible failure, because y'all have no good hand-eye coordination. Y'all need to play more video games. No. But I brought in a beach ball, right? I'm using markers to help put the information on the board so it stays up there and you can see it and it remains in your memory. I'm using this clipboard in order to, when I move it around, it makes my lecture a little bit more exciting. Yeah? You can use objects to your advantage. I mean, this is what the whole trade of magicians is all about, right? Using objects for misdirection or to amaze you so that they can take your money. Right? I forgot to write this down before. We'll mention just a few more. Think about imagery like a political cartoon or a painting or another piece of art. What would you pay attention to if you were creating this art piece and you were trying to evoke a certain feeling in the audience, or you were trying to send a certain message, what would you think about? Say that again? One more time. Art style. Thank you very much. Are you going to draw your political cartoon like one of the Renaissance masters that pays special hyper attention to body proportions and musculature? Probably not, right? You would use some line drawings and some color for a political cartoon. Of course, you'd pay attention to colors. You'd pay attention to not using some colors, right? If you want to compose a piece that is cohesive, you're not going to try to use clashing colors unless that's part of your goal, right, is to be striking. A black and white image leads to a different kind of experience than a full color one, right? And everybody who's been involved in filmmaking or art knows this. Again, you'd also pay attention to medium and technique. Should I paint this? Should I draw this? Should I do it on the computer? What tools am I going to use? What techniques am I going to use? And you'd think about, well, okay, let's say I want to create a painting that persuades my audience that they should care about temperatures rising around the world. Let's say you're an environmentalist. What kind of thing would you make the subject of your piece? Maybe something to do with the earth or the environment, right? Maybe if you were trying to be striking, you would create something like a flower bursting its way out of a mound of garbage. Something like that, right? Everything you do is going to influence the thoughts and the emotions of people around you. The way you carry yourself, the words that you use. If it's an image, the colors, the techniques that you use, the clothing that you wear, how you present yourself, all of this stuff is going to have an impact on your audience. And so when you're looking at texts, you should think, especially about this, and if it has to do with the speech, like this, if it's like a cartoon or art, you should think about these considerations as well. If you don't try to really reflect on these or get to the bottom of these different things, your understanding of the piece is going to be severely limited. And thus, your own understanding of the emotions you're feeling and the reactions you're having and the thoughts you're having is also going to be extremely limited. So, when you approach a philosophy text in this class, you should ask, are there any literary devices being used? Are there any symbols being used? Why does Plato use this word here? Why this word? What does this phrase mean? Why didn't he use this other phrase instead? Why, for example, does he decide to express his philosophical ideas in the form of a dialogue between people? What kind of effect does that have? What am I feeling right now? All of these things are going to help you better get inside of the mind of the speaker. And it will lead to more self-knowledge too. Okay, any questions about this stuff? Make sense? I know it makes sense, but you actually have to do this in practice, okay? You can have all the information, but if you don't actually apply it, it does nothing for you. It holds no value. Okay? So, just to end, ask questions like these. Why these words in this order? What does this make me think or feel? And why? What's the tone? How do things appear? What emotions or goals lie behind this thing, the production of this thing? If you can ask yourself those questions, if you can really reflect on that when you're reading these pieces, when you're looking at an advertisement, when you go to the art museum, not only will you be improving your critical thinking skills, but you will expand your knowledge of the world. You will expand your understanding of yourself, why you tick the way you do, why you have the thoughts and emotions that you do. Okay, that's pretty good for right now. You can finish writing down whatever you're doing, but then feel free to take like a 10-minute break. Come back here at like 1:25, 1:26, something like that. And we will resume for our second half of class. Sound good? Yes, Professor Gunner, sounds lovely. Thanks. Okay, great.